But for now, we need to stay on the economy as well, because Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta in the 2023 mid-year budget review slashed Ghana's GDP growth by from 2.8% to 1.5%, signaling that the economy was expected to grow, but not as initially projected. So this afternoon, the just released GDP figures by the Ghana Statistical Service is indicating to us that there's a decline actually in growth of the Ghanaian economy, with the industry sector recording some negative growth. Again, construction, electricity and manufacturing are all contracted, of course, and we know the government statistician, Professor Samuel Kwabena has been speaking to the press about it, indicating that for the first quarter, growth rate from the earlier 4.2% declined to 3.3%. Listen.
In the second quarter of 2023, from both an oil perspective and a non-oil perspective, the economy grew by 3.2%. From an oil perspective, the 3.2% that we've recorded for the second quarter of 2023 indicates a 0.1 slowdown relative to what we recorded in the first quarter of 2023. In the first quarter of 2023, the economy grew by 3.3%, and in the last quarter of 2022, the economy grew by 3.7%. Over these 3 quarters, the 3.2 indicates the lowest growth rate, as the economy grew by 3.7 in the last quarter of 2022 and 3.3 in the first quarter of 2023. From a non-oil perspective, the 3.2 growth rate that has been recorded for the second quarter of 2023 indicates a slowdown relative to the last 2 quarters. As from a non-oil perspective, in the last quarter of 2022, the economy grew by 4.3%, increased marginally to 4.4% in the first quarter of 2023, and a dip of 1.2 percentage points to 3.2 growth rate non-oil perspective for the second quarter of 2023. Growth rate across the different sectors: the agricultural sector for the second quarter of 2023 grew by 6.0%, and also the services sector grew by 6.3% for the second quarter of 2023. While we saw a growth rate for agricultural and services sector, respectively 6.0 and 6.3% for the second quarter of 2023, the industry sector contracted by 1.9% for the second quarter of 2023. These growth rates relative to the average for the period 2014 quarter 1 to second quarter 2023, we see increases for the second quarter of 2023 for agricultural and services sectors, while we see a slowdown or a contraction for the industry sector, as it contracted by 1.9% relative to an average of 3.9% for the industry sector for the period first quarter 2014 to second quarter 2023.
Let's look at the implication now as we further break down the figures released by the Statistical Service. Joining us now is data analyst Isaac Afie with the Joy News team. Isaac, fresh figures, but yeah, we're getting bits and bits of info as the hours go by. But the headliner is that we're not growing as we should. What for you, and that should be your personal assessment of the factors, is accounting for why we're here today?
In the mid-year budget review, made a tall list of revisions, not just the GDP, but we revised up our inflation target, also our import cover. Everything was revised downwards. So the finance minister, in fact, revised our GDP growth rate for 2023 from that 2.8 that was actually projected in November 2022 to 1.5%. This was in line with the IMF target of 1.5 by the end of 2023. But we are hoping that starting from 2024, 2025, 2026, when the IMF program is finally over, we should see growth rates revamping. But what we see currently is a slight dip, about 0.1%, but in economic terms is very significant. In the second quarter GDP. So it simply means that you are comparing the GDP in the second quarter of this year to the GDP in the second quarter of 2022. And if you do that, that will be comparing 3.5 in 2022 to now 3.2 in 2023, and so there's some sort of slight decline in the economy is slowing down.
But even if you go a step back, as we're seeing on the screens right now, quarter 2 2021 was way higher.
Yeah, it was higher.
4.5, correct?
So you are looking at the non-oil. I think
yes.
if you look at the blue. Okay.
Yes.
The red
4.5. Yes.
Yeah, 4.4. Right.
Yes. No, it's 5.
4.5. I think it was relatively high.
Yeah.
That's why we say that the economy is currently on a certain sort of a slowdown, but it's as expected because the overall GDP for the entire year has been revised to 1.5, and so you should expect some of this, sector by sector, decline. But let me go through the sector by sector analysis because it's important.
Very important.
Putting focus on probably the industry sector. So let's start with the agri sector. It grew by 1.3% in the second quarter of 2023. Under the agri sector, there were three, subsectors that recorded, expansions. We have fishing, 2.8%, livestock, 1.4%, crops and cocoa, 1.3%. But there's one subsector that recorded a decline or a contraction, which is forestry and logging. And we all know the problem going on with illegal mining. Recorded a contraction of a significant 1.1% in the second quarter of 2023. Industry sector is still recording negative growth. It's still shrinking. Recorded a shrinking of 0.8% in the second quarter of 2023. It was only mining and quarry that recorded 0.8 expansion. But if you look at the subsectors,
and what's more worrying, just before we get to that aspect or space, you can tell clearly that it's also having an effect on imports and exports.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because just look at the chart on the screen right now. Is a services sector that's currently driving the
economy, which is dangerous.
Which first used to be agri and even industry, which is supposed to probably employ majority of the workforce
and to produce more locally,
produce production, and then also help to bring down inflation. Yeah. Is currently contracting, or is currently shrinking. That is why you have Guta and Co. all saying that the taxes and some other things that probably are affecting. GSS just released PPI and it's still very high. CPI is also high. Inflation and other things are still very high. Depreciation of the CD. But it's important to note that if you look at the construction subsector, for instance, it shrunk by 3.1%, very significant. Electricity by 1.2%, manufacturing 0.1%, and water supply, management and remediation activities by 0.8%. Now, services sector recorded some massive, growth by 2.6% in the second quarter of 2020. But blessed, the government statistician also revised, the first quarter GDP figure was, I think, around 4.2%.
Yes, 4.2.
It has been revised from that 4.2 to now 3.3.
Yes.
And the government statistician explained why they have to do this revision. It was because in the first quarter, the provisional data that they had, they pegged, the services sector growth rate at around, I think, 10%. But now, upon revisions, they are looking at somewhere around 6%. Yeah. And so there is a need to revise that 4.2% to 3.1%.
Okay, you know what? The viewer out there is asking the question, so what's the outlook for me? My personal economy. I mean, that's what matters.
Well, I said it, I am not surprised because we are still going to do probably a third round of a DDEP. And all of these is supposed to, we measure GDP by production. Yeah. I mean, if you are measuring GDP by production, and the subsectors in your economy are being battered with DDEP, debt restructuring, and a whole lot of things like other things like inflation, then you certainly don't expect your economy. So I agree with the IMF when they say the economy will grow at 1.5. The finance ministry or government said we're going
fighting
to
that
2.8. They realized that this was not going to be realistic. But let's look at this. If you're able to record an additional, maybe a figure about 3% in the third quarter, then probably we may probably grow more than 1.5 at the end of the year. But as it stands now, there's some sort of slight, decline or, in terms of our economic expansion. But things are looking good, especially in the services sector.
Yeah.
But in the industry sector, it's not looking good at all.
I like to keep the balance because we're positive if our industries are active.
Yeah.
That's, the bane of every developing economy when you don't have your industries functioning well. We've heard from, for instance, the AGI point out on countless occasions that what's happening to the Ghanaian economy, they are bearing the brunt the more because everything seems to affect them the more.
Yeah, because, if you, just like Joseph Obin was saying,
Yes.
if you go to the port, you are subject to a whole lot of, scrutiny. Not just that, but your imports duty has also been increased. Apart from that, you also have this depreciation that you have to deal with. Your capital that you are working with, just because of depreciation, you may have lost significant amount of it. When you bring the goods into the economy, people are not able to purchase because inflation is
also
eating
high.
their purchasing power. So the Ghanaian economy is in some sort of crisis, but I hope that, and I believe that, we'll come out of it. If you look at this IMF program and probably the PCPEC program, if you're able to, implement some of the policies that we say we're going to do and cut down on cost and wastage and do debt restructuring properly.
That's all we can hope for.
Yeah.
We can just hope that things will get better.
Yeah.
Some way, somehow. If it's by magic or...
But Nigeria is
economics or
beating us
whatever
in terms
it is,
of
yeah.
inflation. I think they are around 24% or so. We are still hovering around 40%.
Yeah.
And we are in this together. We were all affected.
Together,
by-
you say?
Well, some people were allowed to.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, Isaac Ovieje, let me spare you, of course, the trouble. Thank you for updating us on this latest figures we're receiving from the Ghana Statistical Service. You're watching The Pulse here on the Joy News channel. When we get back, we have some more stories for you.